Before you today, we have a rezone request at 312 and 313 South Asbury Street here in Moscow. And just to orient yourself to the subject properties, they're outlined in red at the center of your screen. We have 312 South Asbury Street on the east side of the street. It's a little over a 6,000 square foot parcel. You also have a 7,500 square foot parcel, which is addressed as 313 South Asbury. Across the street from 312 to the west, you have Asbury Street running north-south through the middle of both parcels. 3rd Street here to the north. You also have various residential uses, single-family, two-family, and multifamily residential uses predominantly to the south of these properties. You also have commercial properties which are adjacent to 3rd Street, have a RE/MAX real estate office, Subway, accounting office, as well as a grocery store and a used car dealership there to the northwest. Looking at our comp plan, land use designation for this area and the subject properties, currently designated as urban mixed, as long with the majority of the properties to the north to the south. You have an auto-urban commercial designation as you transition into Pullman Road there to the west. Also downtown core is within your urban commercial land use designation. So what that urban mix designation means is that those areas are intended to provide for infill development and adaptive reuse of areas that surround the downtown area. A rich mix of residential and limited commercial uses should be promoted through the development of small urban apartments, townhomes, and 2 to 3 story vertically mixed use buildings. The urban mixed area should provide a pedestrian connection between the University of Idaho and downtown and provide space for a variety of housing alternatives, niche retail, restaurants, artist studios, as well as personal and professional services. So looking at the zoning map of the area, you'll notice that 312 South Asbury Street's within the motor business zone. That's the light teal color there. You have the R4 zone to the south. And so initially how this progressed was that the applicant of 312 South Asbury Street had submitted a rezone request to our office. During the preliminary review of that request, it was determined that the property across the street to the west, you had the motor business and R4 zones, basically that motor business zone transecting through the middle of that property as well as the residential dwelling that's currently built on that property. And so the staff contacted the owner of 313 South Asbury Street and received their permission in order to expand that property into the rezone area to include both parcels. And so this would be the proposed zoning map before you tonight, basically rezoning those two properties from the motor business designation on 312 and half motor business and R4 on 313, basically all to the multifamily residential, which is our R4 zone. Yes.
This was a classic example when I was on P&Z 12 years ago of the things we ran into where we'd have a piece of property and it'd be 2 different zones going right through the middle or a portion of it from yesteryear, and one of those things that we're slowly but surely kind of cleaning up as time goes along. Dan, you had a question yet?
Yeah, I'm looking at what's obviously a 300 address on South Lily as well.
Yeah. You got my question.
Is that, was that homeowner contacted as well?
Well, I have the code for you right here that explains that. So in a portion of our zoning code, we have a section that basically states where a district boundary line appearing on the Moscow zoning map divides a platted lot which was in single ownership at the time of the passage of this chapter, the requirements of the less restrictive zoning district shall apply to the whole thereof, provided that such extension shall not include any part of such lot more than 30 feet beyond a zoning district boundary line. So basically that line there is 20 feet in width. And so the existing zoning covers that. And so we basically just apply the R4 zone, and that's allowed through the zoning code. And so we didn't see an issue with that one, but the one at 313, as you can see, it's probably about 40 to 50 feet in the motor business. So we had an issue there. Okay. But the other one on Lily, we don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom? So just to follow up with what Dan's asking, so you did not contact the landowner, it just wasn't necessary?
It wasn't necessary to contact the landowner on that property, no.
It just looks so untidy that the line goes through. Well,
it's because
but you're saying that it doesn't. But
yeah,
that R4 just applies.
You can automatically just assume that the R4 would go up to that property line.
Yeah,
anyway.
We got that.
Other questions for Mike?
Yeah, I do. In the application, there was a filing fee of $620 that the applicant had to pay, correct?
Correct.
And what about the other property to the east, where it's getting, as an effect of that application, is also going to be a recipient of being rezoned properly?
Sure. Yeah, I had contacted the owner of that parcel at 313, and I asked if that was all right with the applicant that had submitted the original rezone proposal, and she was fine with that at the time. And so that's when we
I understand that, but my question is, Ms. Maggie had to pay $620 to file this, but the other party is getting the same effect, the same benefit of a rezone at no cost. And I don't want to get in trouble with staff by saying this, but I'm questioning where the fairness is that she had to pay $620 to get this cleaned up, where it was the city that made the mistake to begin with. Am I correct in the fact that the city made that mistake in the actual rezone, or are we back on the premise that at the time it was rezoned, the assumption was that the business district was going to move in that direction, in a southerly direction?
Well, we had no issue with this up until about 1991, and that was the point where we required residential uses within the motor business zone to go through a plan unit development, or else they weren't allowed.
Okay.
And so up until that point, they were basically allowed, all motor business zone throughout the city. It was pretty much the ultimate mixed-use zone because it allowed almost all commercial uses as well as all residential uses. And so those large rezones on like the West A Street corridor, North Main, those were probably permitted underneath that zoning at the time because we allowed all those residential uses in the motor business zone. And so, if you're just looking at two parcels, I don't think we would initiate a city-initiated rezone at that point. It'd have to be a larger corridor. But we just recognized, we probably hadn't looked at this one previously to Ms. Maggi submitting the rezone request. And so, we thought under the zoning code, it's in our power to expand that rezone area when we see fit. And so, looking at this two-parcel analysis, we ended up expanding that area. Now, if this affected a whole corridor and 20, 30 properties, then we probably would have identified that earlier on and done a city-initiated rezone like we had done on North Jackson Street, West A Street, North Main Street. But those are all similar in that one applicant had submitted a rezone application, and we thought it was in the best interest to expand it to that larger area.
Makes sense. I don't have any other questions. I'll have some comments, but later.
Okay. Anything else before I open it up? Thank you, Mike.
You still have
part of
yep.
the presentation. Sorry, we were ready to chop you off, Mike. So go ahead and continue.
I skip to the end. We're just going through the R4 zone. So once again, the proposals from the motor business zone to the R4 zone. Looking at what the R4 zone speaks to, it's intended to provide for the most intense residential land uses permitted in the community. It is to be applied where activity levels are high and adequate public facilities are available, especially near the University of Idaho campus or the city central business zoning district. Adequate transportation access should be given high priority in determining the appropriate location for those R4 zones. So looking at the allowed uses within the R4 zone, basically you have single-family, two-family, multifamily, as well as up to 2,000 square feet of professional office uses. So a little bit of a mixed-use zone. Looking at what the professional office is defined as, it's offices maintained and used as a place of business conducted by persons engaged in the healing arts for human beings, such as doctors, dentists, engineers, attorneys, architects, accountants, and persons providing services utilizing training in or knowledge of the mental discipline as distinguished from training in occupations requiring mere skill or manual dexterity of the handling of commodities. That brings us to a recommendation before you tonight. We wanted to remind you that the City of Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission conducted a public hearing on the proposed rezone, and that happened on May 28th, 2014. They recommended approval to City Council with no conditions. I'd also like to note that the applicant did attend one Historic Preservation Commission meeting to basically present the historical value of the dwelling that's constructed on her property, and the Historic Preservation Commission ended up writing a letter on her behalf speaking to that historic value of the structure, and so that's attached to your packet tonight. And with that, staff recommends that the council conduct a public hearing upon this proposed rezone, and upon consideration of any testimony presented, approve the proposed rezone ordinance under suspension of the rules, requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that they be read by title and published by summary. With that, I certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Any other questions for Mike? I think we're ready to go, Mike. Thank you. I will officially open up public hearing as of now. Is the applicant, Miss Maggie, here? Would she like to present? Would you like to come forward, ma'am, and state your name and address, please?
I'm Maria Maggi, and I live at 312 South Asbury Street. I read somewhere that it's best to leave a place when you still love it and feel thankful for all the gifts it's given you. I would add that it's best to try and leave a place better than I found it. I guess that's why I'm here tonight. In the 117 years of its life as a residence, my house has been drawn in and out of zones and districts. When I discovered it was suddenly located in the center of the new Legacy Crossing Urban Renewal District several years ago, I started to pay attention to what that might mean. As some of you who were on the council back then may remember, my attentions first took public form when I spoke out against a rezone of the east side of South Almond to commercial status. Although I did not succeed in changing the tide, I waxed lyrical about the need for trees and neighbors and how the people who actually live in the district put the residential in residential. I was assured my block would not suffer the same fate as South Almond. We all, including Bill Belknap, assumed that, like the rest of South Asbury, it was R4. Because it didn't matter 20 years ago when I bought the house, I had forgotten its status in motor business. But the banking crisis of recent years has made its future quite precarious unless it is rezoned. Now that I understand that fully, I did not hesitate to do what I believe is right for the future of the property and the neighborhood itself. In the last few years, I have also spoken up and walked the district to talk to my neighbors in support of the new Lillian Ottness Pocket Park and the need to keep Gormley Park as a city park. It was a pleasure to talk to neighbors I knew and meet new ones and have everyone agree it's important to have green spaces in the district. So I guess you could say I've been a crusader for the quality of life in the Legacy Crossing Urban Renewal District amidst the dramatic transitions occurring in it. Ironically, that effort is culminating in the need to speak up for my own house. But life is pretty funny that way. Perhaps there is a reason I was born the same year these two pieces of property, mine and the one across the street, were sloppily zoned into motor business. Whatever the motivation, it was decided in a time when the exact nature of that designation carried much less ominous weight than it does today. I didn't mention this specifically in my comments at the Zoning and Planning Commission public hearing, but I am happy to have 313 South Asbury included in this rezone. Before buying 312, I once lived at what would later be affectionately named Yellow House by the groups of students who lovingly lived in it after Eric Cookman repainted it that color. It was even given a sign with its name in the form of a round of old tree, which stands on its side with the words Yellow House burned into it and painted, of course, yellow. It is from the vantage point of its front upstairs bedroom that I first dreamed of buying the little blue house across the street, even though it wasn't for sale, and at the time I had no plans or money saved to buy a house. But one day, as I was staring at it instead of grading my papers, I found myself saying out loud, "That's such a cute little house. I wish that house was for sale." And 3 days later, it was. I took that as a sign that I had better find a way to buy it, and I did. So even before it was Yellow House, 313 was the place where I first experienced how these two properties are the residential bookends of South Asbury. They may be old, but their structures are sound and charming, and the spirits that must protect them seem strong. I believe Eric Cookman bought 313 back from the city after Florence Holiday died and left it to them in a state of serious neglect and disrepair. It seems to me that each time these properties veer on the edge of someone else's idea that their time is up, circumstances turn in their favor as homes. They are now, thankfully and rightfully, both zoned out of the floodplain, too. Most of all, it is my pleasure to stand up for the little blue house that has sheltered me and helped me raise my son and grow a garden and come to learn how to heal and manage a serious illness successfully. I think my request meets the criteria you need to follow, but I'd be happy and honored to answer any questions you have about why I am seeking this rezoning. Thank you for your time and careful attention to helping preserve the future of these intact old properties and their place as a cornerstone of what makes South Asbury the truly mixed residential block we all want it to be.
Thank you, Ms. Maggie. Does anybody here on the council have questions for Ms. Maggie before I move on? Thank you. If something comes up, we'll get you back up here.
Okay.
I will take testimony in favor of the applicant for this rezone at this time. Or I will take general comments and/or disapproval at this time as well. General comments are fine. Please come up, state your name and address.
Oh, Jesus.
Victoria Seaver, 121 North Lily. I spoke at P&Z in favor of this rezone. I'll just mention that I've lived there as a renter before I owned my home, which is just a few blocks away, and I agree that it's the bookends or the cornerstones of that area and very compatible with what's there and should be there. And I might say old isn't bad. My house was built in 1937, and old houses have a life, and a very long life, as do people, and I like my gray hair, and I like old houses. So, go for it.
Thank you. Additional testimony, general or otherwise? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move on. John?
Well, having heard this 3 times now and agreeing with it every time, I would make a motion that we put the properties 312 and 313 Asbury and rezone them into R4 instead of the motor business and R4, and to go along with all of the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary.
If I could ask for a point of clarification. So, John, do you intend that the proposed ordinance in the packet is the one that you wish to have approved?
Yes.
Just want to make sure. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, John made a motion to approve the rezoned
Ordinance?
rezone ordinance, that's correct, and the suspension of rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that they be read by in title and published by summary. Tom seconded that motion. Any discussion before I take the roll? Wayne?
Just want to comment that I think it's really interesting that the interest that everybody seems to have in their own neighborhoods. You know, I sit on the Historical Preservation Commission, and we do a lot of talk about Fort Russell District. Everybody that's so proud of the Fort Russell District, but I'm pleased that you folks take the interest that you do in your neighborhood too, and that neighborhood that you live in is just as important as the Fort Russell District as far as you're concerned, and probably more important since you live there. So I think that's an interesting observation.
Art?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'm very much in favor of this as well, partly because it removes nonconformities that were inadvertently created way back when, and also these lots, definitely don't deserve a motor business designation due to their size and distance from a major road, which puts them out of range of what motor business should be. And I think it preserves a nice residential feel to the rest of the neighborhood. So I wanted to add that part to the record.
Okay. Tom?
I just wanted to say that I also support this. I think it's a good idea to make sure that we're preserving that residential area, and I'm also touched by the pride that the applicant and the various testimony we've heard tonight for that neighborhood. I think it's great.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll start to roll with Art.
Aye.
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 5-0, and I will read this, of course.
I'll wait for you to read it.
So it's your...
I'm doing the next thing.
Okay, you're doing the next thing. Ordinance, what number is this, 08?
2014-10.
10, okay. This is ordinance 2014-10, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, providing for the zoning of approximately 13,785 square feet of property described in Section 1, Multiple Family Residence, R4, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable and providing that this ordinance to be in full force and effect from and after its passage, approval, and publication according to law. Dan.
Since I'll get the next step here and make a motion that we go ahead and accept the relevant criteria and standards as put forth by the Planning and Zoning Commission on June 11th regarding this rezone.
I'll second that.
Okay, Dan made the motion. I'll let Wayne have the second on this to approve the relevant criteria, the same as was brought before from Planning and Zoning. I'll start the roll, John.
Aye.
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 Okay, and the relevant criteria passed 5-0 too, so. Wayne, question?
No? That was,
Public hearing's done.
there we go. Now, if I can have the floor for a moment, Mr. Mayor?
You can have the floor.
Thank you. This is a little bit irregular, but I am concerned about the $620 that Ms. Maggie had to pay to move this forward. Number one, there's another lot that was able to take advantage of this and get properly rezoned because of her initiation of this rezone. And this rezone had to be done because of a process that the city went through a number of years before. So, I've never done, in 7 years, I've never done this, and I've never seen anybody do it, but I'm going to make a motion that council direct staff to refund the $620 filing fee to Ms. Maggie.
If I may, that is not on the agenda for consideration tonight. I'm sorry.
I said it was irregular.
Well, if there's a good faith reason for doing so, that can certainly be brought up at the next committee meeting and discussed if you like.
Which, Public Works and Finance or admin?
That'd be fine, since it's a financial matter. Be happy to discuss that. And Don, I'm sure, has a policy statement he'd like to make in that. And we can do additional research to find out how it came about. So,
Gary, I think
happy to do that.
I think it's fitting to do that, so I would suggest that we move forward with that and put it on Public Works and Finance for the next, have Don do the presentation for that.
I have the agenda right here. Thank you.
How's that sound? Does that sound great? How's that, Wayne?
Well, I don't know. I've never, ever had a motion die for lack of a second. And I'm actually glad it did this time because we got it forward to Public Works.
Your
and Finance.
motion died, sir, but I don't think that's a bad thing because you may have an opportunity to bring it up again here pretty soon.
Yep.